Lesson 1 in Chapter 9 deals with the physical features of the Arabian Peninsula. We're looking at a map right now of the Arabian Peninsula. Let's take a minute and see how many physical features can you pick out on this map. What are some of the physical features? Now remember, the physical features are the features that are naturally occurring. They're not man-made, but naturally occurring. Go ahead and take some time, see how many you can identify on this map. Very good. I'd like to take a minute and point out just a few of those that make the Arabian Peninsula, Iraq, and Iran pretty unique. The first one that we want to take a look at is the Persian Gulf. We will see the Persian Gulf right here, and it is the body of water that separates Iran from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and so on and so forth. It's on the eastern side of the Arabian Peninsula, and the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, if you remember when we talked about them, the waters flow from beginning up in Turkey down through Syria into Iraq and out the Persian Gulf. Let's take a look at the other bodies of water that are surrounding this Arabian Peninsula. On the southeastern portion of the Arabian Peninsula, down where Yemen and Oman are, you'll find the Arabian Sea. On the western side, we have the Red Sea, and that separates the Arabian Peninsula, from the continent of Africa. So Arabian Sea is right here. Our Red Sea is over in this area. Now, whenever you were picking out your naturally occurring features, did you find the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers? We should be pretty familiar with them since we have already talked about the Fertile Crescent and Mesopotamia and those kind of ancient civilizations that were formed there. Again, we said that those rivers begin in the mountains up in Turkey, and they flow down through Iraq and out into the Persian Gulf. That's good. Now, you'll also notice there are some cities that we've talked about in this area, particularly when we were talking about the Islamic religion. Two important cities in the Islamic religion are Mecca, which we know all Muslims are supposed to attempt to make a pilgrimage to Mecca sometime in their life, and Medina, which is just north of Mecca in Saudi Arabia, and that is the birthplace of Muhammad. And of course, Muhammad was the main prophet of Islam. Let's go ahead and jump to the next slide and take a look at the map on that page. Again, it's another map of the Arabian Peninsula. I'm just going to go ahead and move that map up a little bit so that we can see. Again, we have some physical features. Notice what's happening there in Iran. Iran is one of the most mountainous countries in the world, and you can see they have elevations that rise up above, not quite 13,000 feet, but getting pretty close to that. So, very mountainous region. We see some mountains on the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, the southwestern portion of the Arabian Peninsula as well. The climate and vegetation here in this area is mainly a desert climate. It can be both very hot and very cold. Now here's why that happens. During the day when the sun is shining, because there is such little precipitation and very little water in this area, it's one of the driest places in the world, there are not clouds. Clouds could block the sun from heating up the land and making it warm. So without any clouds, it's just an intensified sun that really heats this area and makes it very, very hot and very dry. In the nighttime, we have the exact opposite happening. The heat that would normally be blocked in by the clouds is allowed to escape up into the atmosphere, and it makes it sometimes at night, it can be very, very cold in the desert. So the temperatures vary greatly within a 24-hour period. As I mentioned, this area gets very little rainfall, about 4 inches of rain per year, which is not very much at all. So it is a very dry area, and it makes life very difficult in this region. Not a lot of things can survive. In fact, look in this area. I'm going to circle it here. This is known as, we've got the Arabic word for it, Rub al-Khali. It is known as the empty quarter, excuse me. It is one of the largest sand deserts in the world. All right, it's known for its enormous sand dunes. They can be as high as 800 feet high and up to 200 miles long. There in the empty quarter, that is that region right there. Okay. With this area being so dry, you may ask yourself, how is life supported here? How do people live in Saudi Arabia? How do people live in Mecca and Medina and those other towns and cities on this Arabian Peninsula? And that's a great question, because if you may have noticed, there are no rivers that run through the Arabian Peninsula. It makes supporting life very difficult. What we have, and you should have read this in the book, it's one of our vocabulary terms, is towns and cities were formed around what's known as an oasis. An oasis is a wet, fertile area in the desert that forms where there's some underground water source, an underground well, an underground channel, and that water kind of bubbles up to the surface. So everywhere that we see a town or a city in Saudi Arabia, it's a pretty safe bet to say that it is formed around an oasis. Oftentimes, the people who live in this region look for what's known as a wadis. It's one of our vocabulary terms from the text that you should have read about, and that is a dried out stream bed. Okay, so it's where there used to be water that ran, it's all dried out. They go to those areas and they dig down, and often what they'll find underneath of there is a source of water if they dig down deep enough, some type of well or oasis region. Those are wadis. What we have here is a very unique situation, as I mentioned before. Without any rivers in order to supply them with water, what they have is known as fossil water. Water that comes from the ground, but it's not being replaced by rainfall. Remember, they get less than 4 inches of rainfall over the course of a year. So that water that's coming out of the well, it is not being replenished like our typical wells that we have in this area. When the rain comes, the water seeps into the ground and it replenishes that well. That is not happening on this Arabian Peninsula. So there is a threat that those wells will eventually dry up, and that'll be a concern for the people who live in those towns and cities. Now, can you guess what the number one resource is on the Arabian Peninsula? I bet that you can, especially if you've done the reading in this chapter. It is oil. We hear about it all the time. This area, the Arabian Peninsula, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, they are wealthy. They have very large oil deposits. They also have, with it being a peninsula, they also have all of these waterways that they can bring the oil out and get it to the places that want to purchase it from them. So the fact that they have that oil and that it is such a valuable resource, we rely on it so much, has made some of these countries and the people who run these countries very, very wealthy. Now, we know that oil doesn't last forever, and the more we consume, the faster that it's going to run out. So as we explore alternative fuel sources, that could have a heavy impact on the economies of the countries on the Arabian Peninsula and in this Middle Eastern territory. All right, we're going to go to the next slide. And on the next slide, what you're going to find there are 5 vocabulary terms that you want to make sure that you have in your notebook. Desert climate. We've talked about what the desert climate is. You want to go ahead, if you don't remember, go back into your text and write that into your notebook. The empty quarter. I spent some time, I circled the empty quarter on the map for you. You want to go back and take a look at that. An oasis. You want to take a look at that. Wadis and fossil water. Those, we will definitely see most of those 5 vocabulary terms again on a test or a quiz. So make sure that you are aware of what they are and that you can identify them. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Edmodo app or the Edmodo website to ask any questions of me and respond to this video. And I'd like to help you out, or you can ask me in class.